Okay, let's see. My volume's good. And it is 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sipiwe Baleka, and I want to thank everyone that has already joined the call. It is an impromptu call because I saw there was a lot of interest in this, and I'm in a position to talk about this, a unique position to talk about this. So I want to welcome everyone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make give some background, make a short presentation, and then we'll have a discussion. So feel free to ask questions. You can type into the chat if you want to ask me a question. But after I kind of go through this, then I'm going to open it up and we can just talk to each other because we're just all peoples here. Okay. I'm going to get started. Perhaps other people will join us later. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen. Because I like to show visuals as I go through this. And the first thing that I want to say is that everything I'm about to say has been documented in my 5-volume, 1,500-page book series called Come Out of Her, My People, 21st Century Black Prophetic Faith and Pan-African Diplomacy. There's 5 volumes. Everything I'm about to say, all the emails that I have had, you know, what we call the receipts, everything I'm about to say has been documented because my mentors taught me that you have to document everything. You have to be able to back up everything that you say. If you go online to thebookpatch.com, this is where you're going to find all the documentation. Okay? In my invitation to everyone, I included links to where you can find a lot of the information that I'm going to present. I've already posted online, so the links are here in these posts. How the African Union was established to include the African Diaspora. So you can go here, you can click those links. This is the documentation and study material. Now, one other thing is I put on here, if you can see these not so flattering pictures of me as a young man with my head hair. I put these on here to give evidence of my credentials. You can't just believe everything that you hear and read. So I put on here my credentials so that people will understand that yes, I was actually there at the African Union when all of this AU 6th Region Initiative stuff went down. And I'm going to explain this as part of my presentation. But this right here, this was, okay, so let me go back. Let me back up. Let me give some history. Let me explain to you why I was at the African Union in the first place. Out of all of the Black African Americans or African diaspora, it could have been present in the moment that the African Union amended its constitution to include the African diaspora. Out of all the people that could have been present, there was only one person present, and that was me. And that's a curious thing. Why me? Why would I be there at this historic moment? So let me tell you this story so that you can appreciate what I have to say. So this is a picture of me in college, okay? And this is a picture of the community I grew up in, which was an all-white community. My father was the first Black person to move into this community, the first Black family. And to make a long story short, this is me. I became a state champion swimmer at the age of 10. And as a result, this is the swim team I'm on. You could probably pick me out real easily. I'm the only Black kid, or there's 2 of us. There's another girl here. But at a very early age, I was already giving interviews, and I was the hopeful. I was a hopeful to become the first Black swimmer on the U.S. Olympic team at a very young age. I grew up in a white community, and I was a dominant athlete in an all-white sport. And as a result of that, I was able to go to Yale University, right, and swim on their swim team, become the first African American on the all Ivy League swim team. While I was there, I had something of a identity crisis, okay? I had something of an identity crisis, okay? And this identity crisis that I had was, I realized here I was at this great white institution. I knew nothing about my history, Black history, or anything like that. And I started to become conscious, Black conscious, politically conscious. I was part of what Du Bois called the talented 10th. But I didn't want to become an Uncle Tom. I didn't want to become a Clarence Thomas. And I started to have all these contradictions. And I was like, why do I not, my name was Anthony Nathaniel Blake. Why did I have this name that was Spanish, Italian, and English? And here I am, I'm a Black person, obviously has African origins. So I had this identity crisis, and I ended up leaving school 2 months before graduation. I was studying philosophy and physics. I had a 3.6 grade point average, but I was lost. I realized that when I graduated, I would be entering this whole new world, and I didn't know where I fit in, and I knew I didn't want to work for white people, and I didn't want to become a tool for white supremacy. So I left school, and I ended up traveling around the world for 15 years, and I became a devout Rastafarian. Okay. I started reading every Black history book, every Black consciousness book, and just giving you background, so I want you to be able to appreciate what happened by the time I arrived at the African Union. Okay, this is where I spent all my time at Yale. Spent all my time in the pool at Yale, right there. And I left Yale, trying to find myself. And when I left Yale, one of the first things that happened was I came under the mentorship of George Edwards, who was a Black Panther, original Black Panther Party member in New Haven, Connecticut. I had traveled, I went to Europe, I had no money. I traveled around just hitchhiking and all kinds of stuff. I had no money. And I came back to the United States, and I came under the mentorship of George Edwards, who was a Black Panther. I eventually re-enrolled at Yale because I only had one more semester, but I became politically active. I got involved in the local strikes. Here's a picture of me back at Yale my last semester. I started writing for a Black newspaper at Yale, and I became involved in political activism. We did fundraisers for Mumia Abu-Jamal. I ended up going to Philadelphia and spending time with the youth organization. I moved back to Chicago. I came under the mentorship of this man, Baba Shaka Barak, who was the student of General James, who was the best student of Marcus Garvey, the first graduating class of Marcus Garvey's School of African Philosophy. The student was General James. And General James's best student was this man, Shaka Barak, who became my mentor. In Chicago, I also joined NCOBRA. I came under, I started working with Baba Hannibal Afrique, who was a legend in the Republic of New Africa. So these were the people that, as a young man, who started to guide me and mentor me. Eventually, I started working at the Nkrumah, Washington Community Learning Center. And there I was mentored by a man named Irish Elamine Green, who was an associate and a student of Dr. Y.N. Clyde, who was one of Malcolm X's best students. Dr. Clyde became the Organization of African American Unity president of the chapter in Canada. He wrote a book called The Political Philosophy of Malcolm X. So anyways, I had all of these great mentors and tutors and teachers who were instructing me on all facets of our liberation movement. So all of this was happening to me as a young man. After I left Yale, seeking this new identity, I changed my name from my slave name, Anthony Nathaniel Blake, to Ras Nathaniel. Ended up becoming part of the Rastafari movement in Chicago. And that's where this AU story starts to take place. Because in Chicago, there was Frontline Distribution, which was a bookstore, but it was also published what was called the Rastafari Speaks newspaper, which was distributed internationally. It was right down the street from where I was living. And in 1999, they had a contest. Anyone that could answer, it was a quiz, it was a 100-question quiz, and anyone that could answer all the questions correctly would win an airline ticket to go to Ethiopia. Well, turns out I was the only one that could answer all the questions. I won the ticket, and this is how I ended up going to Ethiopia. Okay. Now, at that time, while I was in Chicago, I started writing articles for the Rastafari Speaks newspaper. So by the time I arrived in Ethiopia, I carried with me some of these newspapers with my articles. And the Rastafari community in Ethiopia told me, they said, listen, you should go and register with the Ministry of Information in Ethiopia and get your press credentials. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody in the Rasta movement had ever done that. And they said you should, so I did. And here it is right here. You can see right here, Mr. Anthony Ras Nathaniel Blake, that's me, representing Rastafari Speaks newspaper. This was my Ethiopian press credentials. Now by this time I was, militant, radical, Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist, revolutionary, but I had a background, when you study philosophy, that's what I got my degree in. You have to read a lot of stuff and you have to turn around and you have to write a lot of papers. So I was very good intellectually in studying materials, reconceptualizing them, articulating them, analyzing them. And then this is how I got my degree. So once I got the press credentials from the Ministry of Information in Ethiopia, it allowed me to attend events at the African Union, at the African Development Bank, at the Economic Commission for Africa. These are all institutions who have their headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I lived there for a year. And I put this up here so that I could give my credentials of why I am able to speak on this. And so these are all of the press badges that I had for the things that I was attending. First extraordinary session of the AU. Here is, here again, media. I was attending conferences of African ministers of finance and planning. I was attending United Nations events. All of these things.
Yeah. What are you saying? Yeah.
Somebody there, right? So I wanted to put forward this so that this is why I want you to listen to me. Is because as a result of all of this, when the African Union met in the first extraordinary summit of the Assembly of the African Union, right, in Addis Ababa, this is where they amended their constitution with what is called Article 3Q, okay, which reads, Article 3Q invites and encourages the full participation of Africans in the diaspora in the building of the African Union in its capacity as an important part of the continent. That's it. That's all there is in the African Union Constitution. It's this little Article 3Q. It says we invite and encourages the full participation of Africans in the diaspora. That's it. Now, today I saw that post in our African ancestry group, and somebody said, did you know that the AU, the African diaspora is recognized as a government in the AU? And I saw that and it made me cringe because obviously whoever posted that meant well, but has no understanding of what's really going on. The AU does not recognize the African diaspora or the 6th region as a government. That is completely false. And so I felt I had the responsibility to try to clarify this, which is why I started commenting in the post. So I want to tell you this story, okay? So once I got these press credentials, the first thing I started doing was I started going to the African Union, hanging out there, and I went to their library, and I also went to what's called the Economic Commission for Africa. And I started studying the documents that were housed in the library. And I was reading volumes. I mean, I was probably reading 1,000 to 3,000 pages of proposals every week, which was something I was used to because that's what I did as a philosophy major. And I started to realize that their main concern at that time, one of their main concerns was reversing the brain drain. You had all these expatriate African professionals that were leaving Africa, going to European countries, going to the United States. They were becoming professionals, doctors and lawyers and all, and businessmen and all of that. And they weren't returning to the African continent. And they were calling this the brain drain. The African Development Bank and the African Economic Commission for Africa started studying this phenomena, and they were trying to figure out how can we get these people to come back to the continent and contribute. And so all of the proposals that were being submitted to the African Union and the African Development Bank and the Economic Commission for Africa at that time were centered on what they called reversing the brain drain. And this is how the AU 6th region started. To make a long story short, Senegal, the government of Senegal submitted this proposal. And they were doing all of this projects, and they were spending an immense amount of money, you know, like €1 million to get like 6 people, 6 African immigrants to go back to the continent on what I call 6-month glorified vacation. They go back to the continent for 6 months, they make all this money, and yeah, they worked as doctors and did things. I realized, I was like, wait a minute, what about all of, for example, remember, at this point, I'm a devout Rasta, and I'm at the African Union, primarily representing Rastafari people. And what about all these Rastafari people that have been saying they want to repatriate back to Africa? Just regular, normal people. For $1 million, you could get mechanics, nurses, you know, farmers, all kinds of skilled people. For $1 million, you could get, instead of 6 people, you could get 60 people. And instead of them staying for 6 months, they will stay there permanently. So I started to become an advocate. Once I learned what was going on at the African Union, I started to become an advocate to say, wait a minute, you're missing this part of the African diaspora. Your €1 million programs are better spent if you can identify these people who want to return to the continent and are going to stay there. Let's do a program where we include them. That's what I started doing. So I had an office at the African Union, right? I had an office in the press room, and I was there with the other journalists. And I started sensitizing the other journalists from France and, you know, all these other countries about the grassroots in the African diaspora. I would write pamphlets and I would leave them on the lunch table. Once I figured out they had a formal program for giving talks, I signed up for that and I would do these lunchtime talks. So by the time the African Union met at this assembly and voted on Article 3Q, I was the only journalist from the diaspora and from the United States that was even there. And, for example, Rastafari Speaks had this website, and these were the articles I was submitting to the internet. Remember, this is 2003, so the internet wasn't what it was today. Still trying to, come into it. But I would write these articles, send them to Rastafari Speaks, and I was begging and pleading. You can see on this article, right? At the time, I'm now in the computer lab, available to the foreign press at the first extraordinary summit of the Assembly of the African Union. I received press credentials as a reporter for Rastafari Speaks. Apparently, I made quite a sensation upon entering the Economic Commission for Africa building where the conference is taking place. Most of the African foreign press murmured, Rastafari, as I passed, and television cameras and journalists, particularly from Benin, began to focus attention on me. See, they didn't let people like me up in the African Union. The African Union, it was nothing but elites and opportunists and a certain class of people. You didn't have people like me. I wasn't invited. I just kind of navigated my way in there, under the radar. And so I started reporting on, for example, report of the ad hoc ministerial committee meetings, the proposed amendments to the Constitutive Act of the African Union. So here it was, me, I'm giving you, this is what, I would go in after, there were some meetings I couldn't go to. But afterwards, when everybody was coming out, I would go in and take the papers off of the table and read the proposed amendments and recreate what the discussion was, and then I would report on it. And so here's my first report, and you can see, I wrote, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is the final press briefing, so stay tuned. And then I asked, is this being reported in the press? Is it reaching the African American community? If not, forward this to the Black press. See, I felt a responsibility to the average African American person, the average Black person in the Caribbean, in Central and South America. Right? I felt a responsibility because my mentors taught me all about this. And at that time, it was only the Rastafari movement that was even concerned about this because the Rastafari movement had been lobbying the AU predecessor, the OAU, right, from Jamaica at the time. They were lobbying the OAU, right, on behalf of repatriation. So they were fought, and because the Organization of African Unity, which was the predecessor of the African Union, was founded by Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie in Addis Ababa, right? This is why the Rastafari community was following this when the rest of the Black world, the rest of the African diaspora really wasn't following this or even interested. Only the Rastafari community. They were interested in it, right? But I felt a responsibility to inform the Black nationalists, the Pan-Africanists in the United States, the average person, because it was a historic moment. For the first time in history, we had an opportunity to participate in the governing of the continent of Africa. And nobody knew about it, and I was the only person there reporting. So I felt a tremendous amount of responsibility. So this is my story. The next day, I published another report, the final press briefing of the first extraordinary summit, right? Wearing a new red, gold, and green conquering Lion of Judah knitted shirt, right? I approached the microphone less than 10 feet from President Thabo Mbeki from South Africa and spoke, right? Please comment on the kinds of proposals that were discussed in the brainstorming session concerning the inclusion of the African diaspora in the African Union. Thabo Mbeki did not give a direct answer to my question. I can't even remember exactly what he said, and I wrote. I can't remember his exact response. All he said was that this matter was raised as an amendment, blah, 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 blah. And at the end, I said, please check CNN and or other news to see if this was aired on international TV, which of course it wasn't. Okay, so this is my story of how I got involved, why I was even there. As a result of this and all of this information that I was getting, of course, I became an activist for the AU 6th Region Initiative. And what happened was, right, so I wrote this report. You can read this. This gives the entire history of how the initiative developed, okay? And it will cover some of the conflicts and controversies. But the thing I want to skip to is this, which is the African Union Diaspora Initiative, right? This is coming from Working Group 4, Modalities for Enhancing the Effective Partnership between the African Union and the African Diaspora, and diaspora's participation in the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. So I reviewed all the documentary history leading up to this. Basically what happened is after a bunch of meetings on different continents, they decided that the best way to inaugurate the diaspora's participation in the African Union was to get them involved on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, which is actually a pretty intelligent move because for those of us African Americans in the United States, for example, a lot of our connection to the continent comes through culture, through the music, through the dance, right? So getting us involved on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council was a smart move. And so as this thing developed, they made these recommendations. One of them, which was the AU Diaspora Initiative should establish criteria for selecting non-governmental organizations, private industries, universities, professional associations, primary and secondary educational systems for partnership in the AU Diaspora Initiative. Regarding NGOs, this refers to the development or selection and evaluation criteria for the 20 NGO positions allotted in ECOSOC NGO. Coalitions of NGOs interested in ECOSOC representation and which are recommended by regional secretariats to the AU Commission must demonstrate capacity to design, implement, and evaluate services, projects, and programs which aid improve the quality of life of Africans and African diaspora nations, It concluded by saying all NGOs and coalitions of NGOs in the Western Hemisphere desiring to participate in the African Union development of the Diaspora Initiative should register with WADI. That's an acronym for the Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network, right? Right. All NGOs should register with WADI as the first step of membership in this movement, meaning the African Union 6th Region Diaspora Initiative. So the first step, after reading all of their documents, their proposals, their recommendations, I was the only person, African American, reading this stuff, figuring out the processes, steps, procedures. It was very technical. You had to be able to identify the instructions and follow them. And I did. So the first thing I did was follow this instruction. Register with the Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network. And let me show you. This is the Memorandum of Understanding between the Assembly for Rastafari Universal Education. That was the education ministry I was the director of for the Rastafari community. The Organization of African American Rastafari Unity, Habesha Inc., which was another NGO we were working with, and the Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network. This was the MOU that we signed, following their own instructions, right? And as I drafted the MOU. I'm referring to their own statement and plan of action from the conference that they had in 2005. You know, I'm referencing their own documents, okay? Again, all NGOs and coalitions of NGOs in the Western Hemisphere desiring to register with WADID, right? There were other groups called CPAN, which was the Caribbean Pan-African Network. They were the interface mechanism for the Caribbean. Okay, Europe had its own, and so we were developing our own. So I drafted this MOU in 2005, And as part of the MOU, we established the AU 6 Region Education Campus, which, as part of the MOU, we were to contact the National Black Law students, the graduate students, all the student unions, National African American, any National African American Association you can think of, whether it be nurses, teachers, doctors, construction workers, mechanics. If you were an African American national association, we were trying to do outreach to you to get you involved. Okay, according to the recommendations that had already been decided, right? This was the MOU, and that we would form Ross Nathaniel, that was me, that was my name at the time before I got the name will serve as the lead project director and will report directly to the Foundation for Democracy in Africa, which was the lobbying group in Washington, D.C., which had established the Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network, this thing called WADA. Okay? So I'm just showing you, I'm just trying to give you the receipts so that you'll believe me when I say what I have to say. Okay? In addition to that, the other important thing was this. Right? You can read all of this information on your own, but in some document, in establishing the diaspora as the 6th region of the African Union, Article 3 composition, it said, ECOSOC shall be an advisory organ of the African Union composed of different social and professional groups of the member states of the African Union. And ECOSOC shall also include social and professional groups in the African diaspora organizations in accordance with the definition approved by the Executive Council. Okay. In addition, so this will explain, there was a big controversy over the definition of the African diaspora. To make a long story short, the people that were primarily concerned with making this about reversing the brain drain, their definition and concept of the African diaspora are the expatriate African immigrants, not those of us who are descendants of those who survived the Middle Passage. Okay, they weren't thinking about us. That was never their intention. When you read this document I posted, the entire thing talks about business and investment. They had no concern for us as a people who had suffered the Ma'afa, the African Holocaust. And they were not interested in the development of our human capital. They were only interested in identifying who are the Black people in the United States who have money to invest in Africa. That's how this thing got started. Okay. Finally, one other thing, right? According to ECOSOC statutes, Article 4 membership, Section C, 20 civil society organizations from the African diaspora, as defined by the Executive Council, covering the various continents of the world. So there are supposed to be 20 seats on ECOSOC, Economic, Social, and Cultural Council for the diaspora. Okay? And finally, according to Article 5, election of members, the African diaspora organizations shall establish, right, not the AU itself, the African diaspora organizations. That's us. We are to establish an appropriate process for determining the modalities for elections and elect 20 civil society organizations to the Economic, Social, Cultural General Assembly. So the mandate that was given was, first, register with the Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network, and then we are supposed to determine the process for electing our own representatives. And it was because I had this knowledge, because I had done all this work to study the processes and procedures, that I was able to submit a proposal to the African Union through this Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network to begin the process of electing our representatives. And I did that. And in fact, here you have right here, right, it was approved, and you had news agencies like PAMBAZOOKA, Pan-African News Organization, right, announcing, right, the OAU transitioned into the AU in 2001. And during this time, it began the long-awaited outreach to the African diaspora. The AU verbally recognized the diaspora as the sixth region of Africa, adding it to the other five. Okay? It said one of the attempts included the creation of the Diaspora Initiative within the framework of the OAU. In 2006, the AU Sixth Region Education Campaign partnered with Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Network in an initiative to serve as the interface mechanism that linked the diaspora with the AU. So even the press was acknowledging that I had successfully followed the steps to initiate this process. And we did. And as I posted in the Facebook group, right, we started this election process. We even elected representatives in New York at the time. Okay? Everything was proceeding and was going forward. And then the African Union started acting funny. And they started saying that we didn't actually have a mandate to elect representatives. And it got real funny. So if you want to know that story, I'm gonna open this up for discussion here in a minute. But if you want to know that story, one, I want you to, again, read these links, because I documented everything. Read these links in the invitation, and especially read this article. The AU Sixth Region Diaspora Initiative is failing members of the diaspora whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States. Because what's going on right now is there are a lot of opportunists who, by connecting themselves to the African Union, appropriate status to themselves. Okay? They're not interested in doing the work at the grassroots level to get the average Black person in America to understand and knowledgeable about what's happening, to elect representatives, and to actually start participating in the governing of the continent. That's not what they're doing. The people that know about this and are taking advantage of this are just trying to get. There are certain classes of people that are just trying to get status. Okay, and as a result, because there's no clear mandate from the African Union outside of what I just reviewed for you shortly, you have lots of people using the term AU represent us who have no connection or no mandate with the African Union, because the AU Sixth Region is a nebulous term that anybody can use. And you have various groups, and I started to call these groups out because I felt a sense of responsibility. You have all of these groups saying that they are the representatives of the African diaspora, and they make these things look official, but when you actually question them to find out what's going on, they don't actually have a mandate. And one of the things I noticed was, for example, when they came to my hometown of Chicago to do an event, the people that they invited to the event were high-level Chicago politicians and African and Caribbean immigrants. Now, I'm not part of the ADOS clique, and I have nothing against African immigrants and Caribbean immigrants, but what I'm saying is, in a Black city like Chicago, it has a deep history of grassroots organizing. How is it that you can have an AU Sixth Region event and you don't have a single activist from the Black Chicago community that was born in America, that everybody is an African immigrant or Caribbean immigrant? There's no outreach to us. They're going about the process entirely the wrong way. And when I got incredibly disillusioned when I realized the reality of what was going on. And you have various people claiming to represent the African diaspora who come and go, fly by night, say they have stuff. So recently, right, here you have June 4, 2002. Recently, right, I started having conversations with these people claiming to represent us because remember, I am the founder of this. So I'm in a position to evaluate what you're doing because I started this. And basically, a lot of these people are bogus. They're appropriating this for their own organizational priorities. Okay, so I'm gonna stop with that. There's a lot of information. Again, the documentation for everything. The documentation for everything that happened in that 7-year period that I was doing this work, right, is in these, I don't know if you can see them here. It's 5 volumes of books, okay? 5 volumes of books, all the documentation there. I realized that I was a part of a history that was going to be forgotten if I didn't document it. So, okay, let me stop now. I've got a lot of people that have joined. If you have a question, I'll go ahead and try to start answering questions. Just unmute your phone and just go ahead. Glad got so many people on the call. Anybody wants to ask a question? Right, we just folks here, right? So we just family from Africa, African ancestry family, most of us. Somebody said the mic is going. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just not reading this.
Hey, this is Candace. So there are some questions in the chat that I've seen, but someone asks what progress has been made with Region 6 currently.
Okay. In terms of progress, there are 2 tracks. There's what I would call legitimate intra-African Union progress, meaning progress that the African Union acknowledges and endorses. And then there's what is going on outside of the African Union. Okay? So as far as I know right now, I don't even know that they have seated the 20 representatives in the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. This is, according to the African Union's own mandates, the first step to getting us involved, was to get these 20 representatives. The second step was to elect what they call the panel of the wise. Each zone, each region of the African Union would have their wise representative, right? Someone, a wise elder, scholar of the Pan-African movement, right, was supposed to sit on this panel of wise to serve as an advisory council. And that would include someone for the African Union. That person hasn't been elected. In addition, there's another structure within the AU called the Pan-African Parliament, in which all the regions of the African Union are supposed to participate. We don't have anyone sitting on the Pan-African Parliament because no actual progress has been made in following the mandates of the African Union itself. And the African Union itself admits it has no clear instructions for what the 6 regions should be doing beyond what I just told you. So in terms of progress that is legitimate and lasting, there is none. Now, outside of that, you have various groups of people in Europe, in the Caribbean, even in America, Central America, South America, various groups that have formed organizations or institutions using the AU 6th region that have done various projects, have various connections to individuals within the African Union that are doing various projects, some of which are wonderful and involve land and various chiefs in certain countries and things like that. But it's not structured and it's not comprehensive. And I'll give you an example. One of these organizations is trying to sell ID cards. And the ID cards that they're selling is membership to their organization, but they have no status with the African Union themselves. But this organization intentionally blurs the line. They will talk about a Pan-African or an African Union passport or an African Union ID, because within the African Union there is an initiative to do those things, but they haven't manifested yet. So you will see organizations talk about what's going on in the African Union and then solicit you to get their ID card. And the average person who doesn't read it closely is thinking that when you get this ID card, it's going to allow you to travel through all these African countries without having a visa, and it will be recognized. And that's not what it is. So it's a game they're playing. I'm highly critical of it. I don't like what's going on. I think there's an intentional confusion of two separate things. Now, if as an organization you want to get people to support your private projects in Africa, that's good. Do that and go ahead and solicit your fundraising. But don't solicit your fundraising and include these kinds of things that raises the people's expectation, only for them later on to find out and be disappointed that it's not what they said. So I don't see a lot of real progress in terms of the AU 6 Region initiative from within the actual structures, because another reason why is it's very confusing. You have within the AU what's called the CSSDA, and you also have CIDO, Citizens, it's in the post, but it's CIDA. These are two separate things that are closely related that are supposed to be responsible for the AU 6 Region initiative, but you can't ever really find out information. You can't really contact them. They don't really respond, and they don't give clear instruction. But these are the entities that are responsible for the AU 6 Region initiative, and they're not doing any outreach in the United States themselves. Like, they don't sponsor their own programs to go to major cities like Atlanta, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, go to the Black communities and say, we are the CIDO, right? We are responsible for the AU 6 Region initiative, and we want to give you accurate information on how to get involved. They don't do that themselves. They're relying on the diaspora to do that, and the people that are doing that right now aren't the right people. So I see a question here. Somebody said, who heads the AU? That changes like every year or every 2 years. They elect a new person. I don't even know who it is right now because I got so disillusioned that I kind of stopped following that and I started doing something else. But every year or two, they elect a new chairperson. But that's on the state side. Right. The AU actually has two tracks. You have the heads of state track, but then you have the administrative track. And it's the administrative track that nobody really knows about and follows that does all the business within the AU. And those people stay around for a long time, and they don't want to do anything to lose their position.
Excuse me, we're missing a lot of stuff that you're saying. Your mic is going in and out.
Oh man, that is so unfortunate. I don't know if there's too much I can do about that. Hopefully the recording of it is good, because I'll post the recording.
Can't hear you at all now.
Is that any better?
Worse.
Is that any better? I tried to make sure everything's plugged in. So sometimes I get real passionate talking about it.
Yeah, it's a story behind my telephone.
You have a question? Anybody else?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Well, you're breaking up a little bit. But you can still go ahead and keep talking, though.
Okay. So let me say this. African Union is the successor to the Organization of African Union. So let me give you some background. Prior to what we know as World War II, okay, prior to the start of World War II, was actually the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. In 1935, every European country already had its territory in Africa as a result of the Berlin Conference, except the Italians. In 1896, the Italians tried to invade the only part of Africa that had yet to be conquered, which was Ethiopia, at a battle. It was called the Battle of Adwa in 1896. Miraculously, the Ethiopians won. They defeated the Italians. They humiliated them. Okay, that was 1896. By 1935, Ethiopia was in the process of massive development. Okay? They were exporting food to the Middle East. Okay? Ethiopia was on its way to becoming a world power and an industrial, as an industrialized nation. And the Italians still didn't have a colony to exploit in Africa. As a result, the Italians decided that if they didn't invade Ethiopia in 1935, Ethiopia would become so powerful that they would never be able to conquer it. So the Italians invaded in 1935. The war lasted for 5 years. And in 1941, the Ethiopians won, and the Italians lost again. Now, at that time, Ethiopia suffered great loss. 3 out of 4 educated Ethiopians had died. And the Italians did something that had never happened before in world history. They took airplanes and they attached on the underside of the wings sprayers that would fly in formation over the Ethiopian territory, and they would spray this poison gas, and they poisoned everything: the land, the water, the animals, the people, everything. And yet, the Ethiopians still won. So after 1941, Ethiopia began the rebuilding process. Now, at that time, the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie was getting some assistance from the British and a few other European nations. But Haile Selassie and the Ethiopians didn't want a lot of European people coming into the country and taking over. And so the emperor looked around and he realized that the most educated and skilled group of black people in the world were African Americans. And so the emperor plan for rebuilding Ethiopia was to recruit African Americans to come back to Ethiopia. In 1954, the emperor sent ambassadors to the United States, and they went to...
Yeah, it does sound like it's gotten a little worse, though.
Oh, no.
The connection, yeah. Because we're getting highs and lows.
Let me see. Watch this. Let me switch microphones.
Who heads the AU?
Testing, 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 testing. Is this any better?
Yeah, that's good.
It's good? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that, people. I'll stay on as long as you need. But I'm telling this background information about after World War II, Ethiopia was trying to rebuild its country. And the Ethiopian Emperor realized that the most educated and skilled group of Black people anywhere on the planet were African Americans. So the Emperor wanted to invite African Americans to come to Ethiopia and rebuild the country. In fact, the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie in 1954 sent ambassadors to the United States, and they went to all the major Black cities with the following repatriation offer. The Emperor said, "We will give you immediate citizenship, a house rent-free, paid a job earning a salary equal to what you can earn in America, paid 3 months vacation, return flights to the United States and back to Ethiopia because he knew we were going to want to see our families and stuff, and in some instances, a car." This was 1954. This was his plan to rebuild the country because he didn't want a lot of European people and advisors coming into the country. So he came in 1954. He sent the ambassadors to promote this. And then, the first time in American history, an African emperor came for a visit. At that time, the United States State Department was worried that when the Ethiopian emperor and his entourage came and saw the reality of Jim Crow in the United States, that this would create a situation in which communist countries would have propaganda, negative propaganda against the United States, and that this would result in all kinds of bad things happening for the United States. So the United States Supreme Court, the State Department sent to the United States Supreme Court what's called an amicus curiae brief, telling the Supreme Court that the emperor is coming in a few days. If we don't do something to show that we're making progress with race relations in the United States, the emperor is going to convince all these Black people to go to Ethiopia, and we don't want that to happen. We want you to pass the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And so, 5 days before the emperor arrived in the United States, they passed the Brown versus Board of Education decision. That decision had nothing to do with providing quality education for Black people. It was a PR move to give Black people hope that integration was the path forward instead of repatriation. When the emperor arrived, all of the media was instructed to ask the emperor to comment on the Brown versus Board of Education decision. And as a result, being diplomatic, the emperor said, "Oh, this is great. There needs to be equality in the world." And so the repatriation offer was completely repressed. And what happened in 1954 is when integration was elevated once and for all over repatriation to Africa. That was 1954. Now, right after that, you had the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya. And then in 1957, Ghana attained its independence, okay? Becoming the next independent nation in Africa, 1957, Ghana. Martin Luther King attended the event, and Kwame Nkrumah started talking about, we want all these Black Americans to come and help us build Ghana. The Emperor Haile Selassie was talking about, we want all these Black Americans to come and help build Ethiopia. But all of this was being kept from us. By 1963, there were now 33 independent African nations. And the Ethiopian Emperor said, we are going to form the Organization of African Unity, a place where all these independent nations would come together and form like one great government for Africa. In the same way that you had 13 colonies in America eventually form one great government called the United States of America. So they were going through this process. That was 1963 when the Organization of African Unity was established. Now, in 1964, Malcolm X goes to the Organization of African Unity and he says, we have a liberation struggle going on in the United States, just like the liberation struggles that are going on in Africa. Can you help us? The instruction, and you can see behind me, this is a picture of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. Haile Selassie, Julius Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, you see all these African, Milton Obote, you see all these African leaders. They told Malcolm X, they said, in order for us to help your liberation struggle, you have to form a single organization that can be the vehicle or the mouthpiece for all 40 million African Americans. Those were the instructions he got. So when Malcolm came back from that meeting, that's when he set up the Organization of Afro-American Unity based on the Organization of African Unity that was set up in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia by Haile Selassie. And that's when he reached out through William Kunstler and some other mutual lawyers to Martin Luther King and said, look, we got to get your followers, your Christian followers, and my Muslim followers, and we got to get all black people. We got to form one organization. So Martin Luther King was like, okay, I'm down for that. And Malcolm had planned a series of 3 lectures, right? And it was the 3rd lecture that he was going to discuss this part of it. Of course, it was that 3rd lecture that Malcolm X was shot and assassinated. Meanwhile, in Kenya, one of the biggest supporters that was at the meeting with Malcolm X and all these leaders was also assassinated by the CIA. Okay? So this history, a lot of people really don't, they always want to focus on Malcolm and the Nation of Islam and how it was the nation and all that stuff. The real reason behind that had to do with the fact that we were in the process of a liberation struggle that was going to be armed, by the way. Most people don't understand Malcolm X was a field lieutenant for the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, which was the black underground, the armed wing of the Black Liberation Movement underground that was prepared to carry out armed attacks as part of our liberation struggle in the same way that Mau Mau was doing it in Kenya, that they were doing it in Algeria. It was an armed liberation movement. And Malcolm X spoke with Ahmed Evans and the other groups of new Africans in the underground movement and said, we will provide, here's what we're going to do. The OAAU, Organization of African American Unity, will provide the international diplomatic front for our liberation movement. That's why they killed him. Now, the reason why I'm going into this is because, right, that was when the AU 6th Region Initiative started. Our involvement in forming the United States of Africa, the government, didn't start with this AU 6th Region Initiative that they talked about in 2003 with Article 3Q. It started at the very beginning of the forming of the Organization of African Unity. That was 1964 and 1965. Meanwhile, in 1966, Haile Selassie goes to Jamaica, says, you're an independent nation, you're mostly black, we want you to join the Organization of African Unity. So here again is another effort to get the African diaspora involved in the governing of the continent. So I have to remind people that the history goes back much further than most people realize. Okay? Between 1966 and 2003, right, all of these efforts were made to keep us separate. And integration was put forward, right? You had the COINTELPRO destroy all the militant, radical, revolutionary, and Pan-Africanists who were involved in these things. And the average Black person in America had no knowledge of what was going on. Okay? During that time, the only group of people that were still connected were the Rastafari movement. And so, again, this is how being in the Rasta movement, that's how I was able to get involved with it. And so, right now, you got to understand, the same people that are selling out the African people on the continent from that time in the 1960s up till now are the people at the African Union. They don't have any desire for us. Now, there is a conflict between African states and African civil society. And the founding of, when the OAU evolved into the African Union, got its update, the average African person on the continent was saying, hey, wait a minute, this can no longer be an institution of African elites and their state apparatus. The African Union must become an institution that is focused, it is people-centered. And so all these civil society groups started protesting and doing things to make sure that they were involved in the African Union. And even to this day, there's a big conflict where civil society feels that they don't have adequate participation. And it's still these nepotistic African elites that are making all the decisions without the African NGOs that represent the people. So most of us, when we hear about the African Union, we just get giddy about it. Oh, and they want to include the diasporas. Without no knowledge of any of this stuff, we just jump on that bandwagon and try to lend support to people who don't care two diddles for us. And so that's why I was like, man, I got to say something, because when somebody said, oh, the AU6 region recognizes us as a government, that is the most ludicrous. I understand that person meant well, but it has nothing to do with reality. So right now, it's a slow go. If we were to build, if African American people could evolve and mature and get past the political differences and the religious differences and all the stupidity that we're engaged in, if we could get that and fulfill the original instruction to form one entity that would be the mouthpiece for African American people internationally, then we could say, here are our representatives to sit on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. Here are our representatives to sit in the Pan-African Parliament, and here is our representative for the panel of the wise. According to your mandates that say that we have to come up with the modalities in the election process. But you have all these competing groups trying to say that they're it with all, and not electing anybody, but basically what they do is, it's like me sitting around a table with a bunch of my friends, and we're going to create this organization. I'm going to be president, you're going to be vice president, you're going to be secretary, you're going to be treasurer, whatever. We're going to say we're this. And then we try to convince everybody to join us after the fact. Instead of doing the work on the ground, bring everybody together, say, this is the information, these are the instructions, here's the thing. Now let's collectively decide the process and elect our representatives. That's how it's supposed to be done. And these groups, they're not going to our grassroots organizations. They're just looking, so remember, it was all about reversing the brain drain. They're looking for business investment. They want to see who are the black people in America that want to invest in business? Which is, if you understand the racial wealth gap, that's only the top 12% of African Americans. 12% of African Americans have 75% of African American wealth. If you're not a celebrity or an entertainer, chances are you're not in the top 12% of African American wealth holders, which means this AU initiative is going to exclude you. They're not interested in bringing you and your family and giving you the resources so you can repatriate, learn the language, reconnect with your ancestral lineage group, and have a good life in Africa. That is not what this AU6 region is about. Not yet, anyways. Sad to say. When I ran the AU6 region education campaign, followed their processes, the African Union gave me exactly $0 to promote their own initiative. I had to do everything out of my pocket. They're not funding the AU initiative. And the only person from their side who had any ounce of credibility when it came to the AU6 region initiative was the doctor that they fired for speaking out about, France and how they still extorting the continent and payments. I forget her name. You know who I'm talking about. Right? She was the only legitimate person reaching out to us, and they fired her. So what does that say about their commitment to the African Union 6 Region Initiative? All right, are you guys hearing me? I hope it sounds better. And we got questions?
Yes, the sound is good.
Come on, let's have some discussion. I just feel like I'm lecturing. I'll talk about anything. I got a lot of resources. Like, all of the details are in these documents, so you can back up what I'm saying. But African civil society is every bit as disillusioned with the African Union as I am and other people in the diaspora are. They're like, they're not really for us.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm so glad we did this because, because from reading it on Facebook, it was like, wow, I missed this, and another person posted also that, why didn't really a lot of other people knew, but like you said, it really wasn't supposed to be like a big thing. Well, I guess us on the low totem pole with, really no dollars, we didn't mean a whole lot. But from what my reading, I really, from one of the people who thought that it was actually for us, it would have been an awesome, awesome, awesome thing. But now that, we know the truth, it kind of makes me sad.
Yeah. I was bitterly disappointed when I understood what's happening. So watch this. Let me show you this. This might be helpful. Let me share my screen. All right. So right now, when it comes to the AU6 region, the most prominent group is this group right here, State of the African Diaspora, this group right here, okay? This man, Dr. Luis Georgius Tin, runs an organization whose acronym is CRAN, C-R-A-N. Basically, this man spent most of his career as an activist for the LGBTQ community. He has a friend in the African Union who at one point became the chairperson. Okay? As a result of that, if I can find it, I always like to show receipts, right? I don't like to just be talking. All right. So what happened was, in 2014, Mohammed Ould Abdel Aziz, president in office of the African Union, gave a mandate to Luis Georges Tin, chairperson of the CRAN, to set up the African diaspora to give substance to the sixth region. You wish to attract our attention about your project that aims to give substance to the sixth region. The interview I had with you and the information that we collected about your activities gave me the assurance of the major role that CRAN can play to contribute to the implementation of the programs of our continent. Since then, with an international team, Luis Georges Tin has formed the State of the African Diaspora, constitution of government, and launched many development projects. The state was officially launched on July 1st, 2018, during the summit of the African Union in Mauritania. It is already recognized by Mauritania, by the Maroon States of Jamaica, by the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and more states from Africa and the diaspora. Okay. And then I wrote, so wait a minute. As noted above, the AU6 region USA Foundation. Okay, wait a minute. Hold on. No, that's a separate thing. Hold on. Let me go back to this. All right. So this is the documentation of how this group claims. Look at that. It says meet the government. Okay. Now, basically, and I did the research on this, right? Let me go back. This right here was a press release. Okay? If you actually go into the African Union documents, there is no African Union vote, decision, mandate, no nothing that says we recognize this group or we give this group the authority to serve as the government of the sixth region. This is just a press release saying we recognize you as a group that can help build the sixth region. They have misrepresented this relationship to say that they have the authority to be what? The government of the sixth region. That is not what this says. Okay? They're recognized as a credible organization that can help develop the sixth region. This is the kind of funny business that's going on. Now, so right now, they have the most visible profile when it comes to this sixth region, right? Now watch this. These are the people. Okay? If you go to, let me see, hold on. I want to see. All right. These are the people that are claiming they are the government of the sixth region, right? Who elected them? How did they become your government? All of these people, if you look at them, right? Where are any of our grassroots leaders? Where are any of our people? All of these people have no connection to the Black liberation movement in the United States. How did all of these people, they're mostly what? African immigrants. Again, the sixth region, the AU6 region, was not intended for descendants of the people who survived the Middle Passage. So these people all know each other. They said, we're going to form this thing based on this weak mandate that we got in 2014. And we're just going to run with that and say we're the government. But the African Union does not recognize these people as a government. And then the question is how are they the government and then nobody vote for them? Now, what these people are doing is, right? If you go and you look at their 6th region and you click on where it says citizenship, right? Your citizenship of the 6th region, sovereign citizenship, when you see this, doesn't that make you think that this thing makes you like officially part or recognized as a citizen of the AU 6th region? Come on now, isn't that what that looks like? Your citizenship of the 6th region. When you actually
Yes,
study,
because
yeah, go ahead.
I pulled that up today. No, I said I pulled that up today, and it has a 6-page terms that I was still reading to see what it was about because it looked legitimate to me.
Yeah, it looks like this legitimate thing that if you get this thing, then you're supposed to be able to fly to Africa, and you can show this at the airport, and they're going to be, oh, you don't need no passport. You don't need, that's not what this is. Read the fine print of what this is, right? It says, oh, they don't even put it on this page. You gotta dig for it. Okay, so you gotta read all of this stuff, and basically, when you read all of this stuff, it's only a symbolic function, right? The 6th region ID has 3 different functions: a symbolic function, a political function, right? It gives you the right to vote for the deputies of the Parliament of the State of the African Diaspora. The Parliament of the State of the African Diaspora, right, is an institution from within this group. It has nothing to do with the African Union. What they're saying is if you get this, you can vote in this institution's business, not African Union business, right? And then it has a social and economic function. It says now here, it says when you are a citizen of the ECO 6, right? Not the African Union 6th region. When you're a citizen of the ECO 6, right? The ID gives you not only priority access to social and economic benefits, such as International Agency for Internships, telemedicine program. They have a travel agency, right? They're trying to set up a bank. So they're selling this ID card under the misrepresented idea that this makes you a citizen of the AU 6 region recognized by the African Union, when all it does is give you benefits from within their own organization. This is the kind of trickery that's going on. This is why I felt compelled to speak out, because they're going to confuse and mislead a lot of people. And then when a lot of people spend money for this and realize they're not citizens of the African Union, that's going to be that's betraying the people. You're hurting the people. So what I'm saying is, if you want to do all these programs that you're doing and you want to build your thing, go ahead and do that. But why do you have to mix it up with this thing because it has to do with status? They know that the average Black person have no idea what's going on in the African Union. So just by claiming an association, that's going to bring a lot of people to them. And they are. They're misleading a lot of people. I hate it. This ID has no standing with the African Union. Now, these people are doing a lot of good projects in Africa. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a hater. I'm not against doing. I'm saying, why can't you do your good projects without the misrepresentation? See what I'm saying? So right now, these are the people that are on the forefront of this 6th region initiative, and they're doing it all wrong. Now watch this, right? Because I felt responsible as the father of this movement, because I was the one there when it began, and I was the first one that tried to do all this work, and I took a different approach. I didn't go to the elite. I wasn't trying to make a place for myself. I was trying to get the collective together, inform them, and then have the collective do it the right way. So I wrote this scathing critique. Everybody should read this. I wrote this scathing blog post about how the 6 regions failing us. I called them out. After I posted this, right, this woman, Keturah Amaoka, reached out to me. And here's what she said. Because I always show receipts. I don't just talk stuff, right? I'm not going to say anything that's not true that I can't back up. Okay? Here's how that conversation went. Okay? Update. After I posted this blog article, Ms. Keturah Amaoka, the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Repatriation Africa for the State of the African Diaspora, reached out to me. Here's the conversation. On May 28th, she wrote, "Dear Mr. Baleka, we trust that you are well in these very challenging times we are currently experiencing. We are writing to you again at this time." She said, "Writing to you again." They never wrote to me. "We are writing to you again at this time in an effort of Pan-African solidarity to answer your many queries narrated in your blog. After reading, yes, we totally agree with you that it is extremely confusing. However, we certainly do commend your diligent order to navigate the many entities and organizations that make up the 6 regions in order for you to support the movement. Therefore, to alleviate any further confusion and frustration, we would be most happy to enter into a dialogue with you at a mutually convenient time in the hope that we can join forces and become stronger in our pursuit of Pan-African unity. Please see below my WhatsApp number and look forward to engaging with you." So I got that, and I'm like, okay, cool. Sounds like they got the good faith, spirit of goodwill. They contacted me. I can get involved and I can help them do this in the right way. So she sent that message to me, right? May 28th at 7:39. So May 28th at 8:45, not even an hour later. "Greetings, Miss Amaoka. Please use this link to schedule a call with me." I sent her the link to my automatic schedule. Okay? "You said you want to talk to me? Hey, here. Click this link. You can schedule time with me. We'll talk." That was on the 28th. By June 3rd, so she had scheduled a thing and then she canceled it. "Dear Mr. Baleka, further to my WhatsApp message, my apologies once again for having to cancel our meeting. However, the lines of communication are open via email. Unfortunately, I am unable to speak about the other organizations that you mentioned in your blog. However, the main motivation for the state is to collaborate, alliance with the other 6 entities, blah, 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 blah. Should you have any specific questions about the state of the African diaspora, I would be very glad to assist you." Okay, so on June 4th, I said, "Greetings, Ms. Amaoka. Please review and respond to my attached letter in lieu of our canceled appointment." I sent it to you via WhatsApp as well. So I sent it to her via email and WhatsApp. Here's my letter. "It's unfortunate that you canceled our scheduled meeting today. I was looking forward to getting a better understanding of the state of the African diaspora, herein referred to as SAD. As you know, it is too easy for misunderstandings to develop when people don't talk to each other. Nevertheless, you stated that communication are open via email. So I take this time to avail myself. I write to you in my capacity as the original director of the African Union's Education Campaign, the first entity to be tasked with building the African Union's diaspora following the historic meeting at which I was present. I will ask my questions directly and then express my concerns. Question: what mandate, beyond the statement made in 2014 by Mohammed Ould Abdel Aziz, President in Office of the African Union, right? What mandate does SAD have to serve as the government of the diaspora recognized by the African Union? 2, is there any official African Union document appointing, stating, or recognizing the state of the African diaspora government? If yes, please provide. 3, according to the African Union, the Diaspora Division serves as the focal point and hub for implementing the African Union decision to invite and encourage the African diaspora to participate in the building of the development of the continent. What is the relationship between the State of the African Diaspora, your organization, and the Diaspora Division under the Citizens Diaspora Directorate Office, CDO, of which I had plenty of communication with directly when I was running the campaign? Meaning, these two entities are the ones that are responsible for the AU 6th region. So I'm asking them directly, what is your relationship with them? Okay. Question 4. Right, because it's one thing to say, right, we're the AU 6th region. It's another thing to say we're working directly with the Citizens and Diaspora Directorate Office. That's the administrative side of the African Union. It is deeply embedded that you never hear about. The ones that actually do the work of the African. Question 4, what is the relationship between the State of the African Diaspora and the Civil Society Division for the Diaspora? That's the CSD DDA, 2 different entities within. So I'm demonstrating to them that I know the inner workings of the African Union, and you cannot fool me or pull the wool over my eyes, because if you don't have a relationship with me, and you're bullshitting, I'm serving notice on them that I know how this works. So I'm asking them these direct questions that I know they're not going to answer. Right? Question 5, how were your ministers elected? They weren't elected, they were appointed by them, their friend. 6, has the African Union agreed to accept or recognize your identity card? 7, outside of your organization, does any government accept or recognize your organization's identity card in lieu of a visa? And question 8, what outreach was done to the traditional, recognized, and credible Pan-African and Black nationalist grassroots organizations and leaders in the United States when your organization's government was formed? Who was contacted and what was their response? I'm going straight at them. And then here were my concerns. So I'm not going to read all of this because you can go to the documents, a lot of reading. You can read, I explain why I asked those questions in detail, and then you can read her response. She didn't answer directly a single one of my questions. They have no direct mandate. But yet, you're going to see their presence all over Facebook, all over the internet as the AU 6th region government. They are completely misrepresenting themselves. So that's where things are today.
Hello.
Somebody,
Hello.
go ahead, somebody say something.
Yeah, Yemna here.
Hey, greetings, Amna.
Yeah, how are you? Yeah, this presentation is amazing. The term diaspora is a bit confusing because some people, immigration from Africa to Europe or America mainly. So they might use this term to say, okay, we are African. So now we are living in America. So we call ourselves African in diaspora. But the same concept, the way you are analyzing it in your situation specifically, how would you compare this African immigration from Africa to America with your situation of Black, I would say, born in United States after more than 200 years? It's a different thing here.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand your question, I am now.
Yeah. What I'm saying, the term diaspora, the way they are using it, they might be using it the way they understand it. Say, okay, we are African. We moved from Africa to United States. So we say we are African in a diaspora. They might say that.
Yes.
But the way I could understand what you're saying, They might be saying, oh, they are like a government governing all Black African in the United States. It's a different thing. They cannot be, they cannot be serious to say, okay, we represent everyone. No, I don't accept that. They might say, okay, we are here, diaspora, represent African, because the concept of being African and not being African is arguable. Some people, I managed to talk to some people here in UK from Caribbean. They refuse to be called African. They don't accept it. They say, oh, we are West Indies. We are Black, yes. Our ancestors are from Africa, but we are not African. You see, that's why it depends who is using the term. You can feel African the way you feel. Okay, I was born in the United States, but my ancestors are from Africa. I can say, okay, diaspora for you can be interpreted differently from people moving from Africa to live in America. And now they are using this term to justify their situations. How can we, yeah.
Okay, so watch this. Let me share my screen. Watch this. So this was the big fight from the very beginning when Abdullah Wade from Senegal initially proposed the AU Diaspora Initiative.
Yeah.
Right? At the time, there was a big fight. And in 2003, right, when I went to this event in 2003, they couldn't agree on a definition of the diaspora. 2 years later, they were still arguing about it.
Yeah.
The definition of the African diaspora, as determined by the meeting of experts on the definition of the meeting of experts. We got to have a meeting of experts on the definition.
Yeah.
April 11th through 12th, 2005 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So 2 years later, their definition, what they came up with was the African diaspora consists of peoples of African origin living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent of the building of the African Union.
Yeah.
Now, I objected to that.
Yeah.
I said, this definition is severely flawed in light of the Out of Africa DNA studies.
Yes.
What is to stop a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Swede desiring to contribute to the development of Africa, for example, from claiming status as a member of the African diaspora, since current science states that his or her ancestors and all human beings originated in Africa?
Yeah.
So I made the following recommendation.
Yeah.
The African diaspora consists of people of African origin, descent, and heritage living outside the continent, irrespective of their citizenship and nationality, and who are willing to contribute to the development of the continent of the building of the African Union.
Yeah.
Under this definition, the Swede would be excluded on grounds that he or she did not possess an African heritage, even though he could plausibly make the case that, well, I originated in Africa. So they were playing around with this, but to your point, there is a common perception amongst Africans from the continent that the term diaspora refers to the people who voluntarily leave the continent and go live in Europe, in the Caribbean, in any other place. That is they are the Africans who live in the diaspora. And it has nothing to do with people like me, whose ancestors were forced from Africa and survived the Middle Passage.
Yes.
There was a very real conceptual divide that was debated at the African Union at the time on what this term would represent. Now remember, the original motivation for the initiative was to get those African expatriates who voluntarily left Africa doing well in Europe, doing well in America, and get them to come back home.
Yeah.
For business investment. Or to have doctors come and do things. So it was don't get it twisted. It required a fight by people like me and others to demand that we not be left out. And we had to remind them of the history that the Pan-African movement started outside of Africa, from our descendants. We had to keep reminding them that. So that's why when people get giddy about the African Union Six Nation, I'm like, this didn't come from a place of benevolence. The African Union wasn't saying, oh, what about those people we lost through the slave trade, which, by the way,
Yeah.
we played a role in. They weren't concerned about our welfare, and so they're going to create this initiative to engage us. It didn't come from that. We have to struggle to make it be that. And right now, the wrong people are in the positions.
Yeah.
And they're not really struggling the way I was when I initiated this. But I couldn't gain any traction. I couldn't get any funding. We couldn't get support. The consciousness of Black people in 2006 and 2007 was not what it is today. We didn't have, most of us hadn't taken our African ancestry DNA test. The consciousness and support wasn't there, so I couldn't sustain the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened. And we see the divide still today. You have a lot of people, you have African Americans think that African people don't want us, don't accept us, look down on us, right? And some of that's true, and some of it isn't. And you got African people who, look down on African Americans, some of that's true, and some of there's a big divide. There are issues there. And this is what is preventing the progress, instead of all of us realizing that, you know what? If we reread African history and we tell the truth that, Mandinka people and Bijago people and Fula people were attacking and capturing and slave trading Balanta people, my ancestors. If we go back and tell the truth, and then we accept the fact that the end result of that was all of us from every single tribe, right, ended up either enslaved on one side of the Atlantic or colonized on the other side of the Atlantic, and none of that has benefited us. So if we all come together and admit the truth, this tribe did this to this tribe, and the result of that was bad. So if we all come together and finally tell the truth and make amends and say, we have learned from this. We can be proud of our ethnicities and where we come from, but we're not going to engage in tribalism because we have a common enemy and we have a common aim or goal, which is we got to improve the standard of living of African people everywhere, particularly on the continent. And if we can all agree on that, then all this division stuff recedes into the background because we have all of the human and physical resources to take care of ourselves, to be independent. But if we can't tell the truth of what happened, right, then we can never repair the damage. This is why African ancestry is so great. For example, my paternal line is Balanta. And I have reconnected with the Balanta people, and guess what? They embrace me. They accept me. They're not looking at me as some outsider. They're like, this is our long-lost Balanta brethren. So if all the people within African ancestry do as we're doing, if the way forward is the people on this side of the Atlantic reconnect with their actual ancestral lineage on the other side of the Atlantic. And when each ethnic group becomes strong, right, then when those strong ethnic groups unite, then you have a strong Africa. There's a
Right.
Balanta woman, her name is Ella Baker. She was actually the leading strategist of the civil rights movement. She's a Balanta woman. She
Yeah.
once said, strong people don't need strong leaders. The way you change the dynamic in Africa is, right, if the people themselves become strong as ethnic groups, and then each ethnic group being strong in and of itself unites with all the other ethnic groups, then you have a strong Africa.
Correct.
And you won't need strong despotic leaders because each people will be strong. The new Pan-African movement is the lineage restoration movement that people within the African ancestry community are leading.
Yeah.
It's a new Pan-Africanism based not on some romanticized, idealized placeholder concept like, oh, we're all Africans, which
Yeah.
we embraced during one point in our history because we didn't know any better. We didn't know where we came from in Africa. We just knew we came from somewhere in Africa. But now we have the DNA testing, we can find out where, but we still carry over the lessons learned from the Middle Passage slave ship and the fact that we have this common enemy and we have this common purpose. How do we escape the jurisdiction of these people? So there's a new Pan-Africanism that says, I embrace who I am as a Balanta. I embrace who I am as Yoruba. I embrace who I am as Tikua. I embrace who I am as Akan. I embrace who I am as Bamilke. I embrace who I am as Temne. I embrace who I am as Mende.
Yeah.
Which doesn't lead to tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to a strong Balanta, a strong Fula, a strong Mende, a strong Temne, and then each group sits at the table together to form a strong Africa.
Yeah.
We were supposed to do that in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm was setting it up. We were all going to be represented by the Organization of African Union. It didn't matter if you were Muslim, Christian, you African. It didn't matter if you lived in the North or South. It didn't matter if you were, a black bourgeoisie or you were a poor black sharecropping farmer. None of that mattered. We had to have a vehicle that could represent us internationally. And we have still failed to do that. So now, instead of trying to engage with the African Union as a unified nation, African American nation, we have to take this alternative course where we have to unify civil society organizations through the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council.
Yeah.
Which, okay, it's an experiment. We can try it and see if it works. But we're not making good use of the experiment because not enough people are willing to read and understand a very complex bureaucracy like I did and learn how to navigate it. In which case, if you're not going to be willing to do that, then you have to what? Be dependent on people like me and just follow my freaking instructions. Well, that's not how we operate. We got egos and that, well, who elected you to be leader and all this kind of stuff? Why should I do what you thought? Well, because I studied and I was there and I put out, notice how I keep showing you the actual mandate. So I can tell you what the procedure is and the instruction is and how to proceed, but I can't make you follow it.
Yeah.
That was the problem the Sixth Region Education Campaign had back in 2007. We were the only ones that knew and interpreted the procedure. And we struggled to get people to understand and follow the instructions. And then once we finally did, then the African Union came in and threw a bomb at us, right, to totally confuse the process, pull the rug from under us and say, well, you don't actually have the authority to do what you do, even though you're following our instructions. And at that point, I said, there's a lot of bad faith. I'm done with this. I didn't have any money anyway. I couldn't continue anyway. And so other people have now taken it up. And basically, I won't hesitate to say it, it's mostly opportunists. Not people who are willing to sacrifice, like I did, their personal agendas for the benefit of the people.
Yeah.
These people, they want to travel. They want to hobnob with people in high places.
Yeah.
They wear nice, expensive outfits and things like that, and they go to these conferences. And none of that money reaches the people in the rural village. None of their efforts benefit them. And when they do investment in Africa, what are they investing in? Coffee shops, high-end real estate. They're not building pumps and solar panel wells for the people in the rural areas. They're not, the development is for a certain class of people. This is what you saw happen when all them people went to Ghana for, you know, their year of return initiative. Them people didn't go out into the rural villages and really help the rural villages. They built high-end real estate in Accra. That doesn't help the people. You got the wrong people running this shit.
Yeah.
So it's 7:49. I pretty much said what I had to say. There's a lot of information posted that you can go back and read. I suggest, like, if you haven't already, the invitation that I posted in African Ancestry has these links. These 4 links give you all the detailed background information. And then again, if you want the real documentation of everything that happened and all the receipts, you can get all 5 volumes of Come Out of Her, My People, 21st Century Black Prophetic Faith and Pan-African Diplomacy from thebookpatch.com. And I think we'll end there. I want to thank everybody for joining. I'm accessible. I comment and post a lot on Facebook and African Ancestry. I'm accessible. So hopefully, if we're not friends already, send me a friend request and you can contact me that way as well.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.